Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of my podcast series, What Does Coffee Mean to You? A podcast series that really has very little to do with coffee, even though it's in the title. And why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. I have, throughout my own journey in the coffee industry, gathered and collected most of my inspiration from other industries. I see tremendous amount of value in that kind of external perspective. And what I'm trying to do with this series is to really bring in craftspeople, entrepreneurs, athletes, professionals, business owners, you name it. But what all of these people have in common is that they somehow excelled at what they do, and they've been inspired me on my own journey. And these are just open conversations where we're looking to inspire you. Perhaps that can help you to figure out what's your next step in whatever fact or phase of life that you're in. So this episode here is pretty special because it's a little bit personal in the sense that Mr. Martin that is about to go on here has actually tattooed most of the tattoos on my body. And that's been such an interesting experience, not just because he's an amazing tattoo artist. And I think for those of you that have tattoos, you know that you're pretty picky with whom you allow to kind of put this very permanent art form on your body. But we've done tattoos now together over basically my whole time here in Copenhagen. So also during my whole time with April, more or less. And it's in a way, it's been the closest that I ever came to some kind of, therapy sessions, which has been so rewarding and interesting. And I think we had so many conversations over the years that when I decided to launch this podcast series, I know from the very beginning that, hey, he has to be a part of it. So really interesting to really deep dive into a very traditional art form here, or a form of craftsmanship that Martin is referring it to himself, and just to learn more about that world, and also to understand better his perspective and his kind of personal journey, which been really so interesting. So I'm really happy to be able to share basically what is a conversation that could very well have happened during one of my tattoo sessions with you here, guys. So yeah, episode 7, and we have Mr. Martin coming in, and thank you so much for tuning in, listening, supporting all of this. It makes a big difference. And as I said a few times before, this podcast format is here to stay. So stay tuned in and enjoy this. I really hope you do. So we're on the inside, and we're about to start. And as always, we start with that first question, right? So Martin, what does coffee mean to you?
Well, what does coffee mean to me? I think that I can say it fairly simple, that to me, coffee is that moment. It's that break. It's a little like, you could say, you take that time off from whatever you were doing, and that could mean coffee, or it could mean, for some people, smoking cigarettes, or eating, whatever, a piece of, I don't know, but that little break there is, to me, essential, because maybe I'm that type of person where I just start running from the morning because I feel like there's always something to get out of bed. There's always a reason. I'm always like on my feet or on my way towards something, or, trying to discover new land, metaphorically speaking. So I need to remind myself I need a break. And that break could be coffee, or eating some weird food, or smoking a cigarette, or whatnot. So I think that's my answer to that.
Yeah, so like the break kind of escape from whatever you try to like normally do like in the daytime, right?
Yeah, escaping, yes, you could say that. Or you could say
recharging, maybe.
It's important for me just to, make sure that I sometimes stop so I can look at things, from a different perspective. Like, let's say you do a painting and you're sitting there and you're on a roll and everything is nice. You feel the color composition is there. You feel like you got that, the look in the eye of the character or whatnot you're drawing, painting. And it feels so good. But at some point, you just need to do that classical thing, like leave the pencil on the table, step back, and look at stuff. Does it actually look good from a distance? The same with what I do at my job. We can come into that. But the thing about, it's super important for those different perspectives and different angles on the same topic, because that makes you kind of, that makes you see your own flaws a little bit easier. And also, maybe that break could also illustrate like, okay, right now I'm trying to run through making some kind of decision on something that's maybe important, maybe not. But maybe it's actually really good to just wait 5 minutes. Let's wait 5 minutes and see what happens, because potentially that decision on maybe the color in the painting, maybe the color in the tattoo, maybe, should I buy that vacation? Should I go there? Is that set of shoes the right shoes for me? Or should I start karate tomorrow? Maybe that decision is actually going to alter in just 5 minutes, because those 5 minutes can be those minutes for me personally, because I never, ever in my life had a problem with making a conclusion. My problem is I can sometimes make that conclusion 5 minutes too fast. So sometimes I need that break. And I need to remind myself that that break is important, both because, well, basically I'm just a human. And a break for me is something where I stop running. I don't want to make it sound like I'm actually running around in my life, but I'm always, like I said before, I'm always on my toes, and I'm always kind of, I always feel like I'm on the path or on the road for something, but what that is, I don't really know. Like a greyhound hunting some ghost rabbit out there it can't see. And that's my life, and I love it. But it's so important that I sometimes just step out of that queue and just look at stuff, not for the saying that, oh, I'm so good at, grounding and, taking off my shoes in summertime and feeling the grass and leveling and, de-electrifying my body and all that, but more the matter of just, hey man, stop for a second, think about it a second time. Do you still feel the same? Well, maybe you do, but maybe you don't. And I also feel like that's part of the journey of, becoming a bit older and a bit wiser, like taking more moments, just being more like, am I actually doing the right thing here? Being a little bit humble about what you're doing. Is this actually okay? Because I could have that narrative that it's running and you're so good and everything's like super fine, but it could also just be like, hey man, stop for a second. What are you doing there? It looks good, but could it look better? Maybe it could. What should you do to do that? Well, we could do this or we can do that, or, talk to the client about it. What do you think should we do? This thing about stepping back also makes me access the part of my brain that makes me become, curious. And I think that's like my most precious, like the resource I have is me being curious on stuff. Like, for example, you asking me to be part of this podcast, I could say, it doesn't fit in my schedule. I have other stuff I could do. Why should I do that? I've never been in a podcast like this before. What can I gain from it? Should I gain something from it? Does it even matter? The one thing that drives me to say, this is a good idea, and that was one of the ideas I could make in an instant, I didn't need 5 minutes to say yes to that, is that I'm curious. What can come out of it? I don't know. But let's see. A little like the stepping back thing, let's see what it does. So
when did that, because it sounds to me like you had some sort of tipping point at some point in your life where it doesn't sound like you grow up maybe being super reflective or giving yourself the time to make the decisions that you maybe are making now. What kind of changed, and when did that change in your life?
I think, well, it wasn't like one isolated incident that kind of flipped my life over, but I can come up with a couple of tipping points. If we roll back history here and say I was a young guy coming out of like a smaller city in Denmark and didn't actually have, let's say, good, surroundings and something that was quite positive towards this creative environment I'm now working and living in and, doing all my fun, I was not inspired by my surroundings. And at some point as a young man, I felt really aside of myself. I felt like I was doing a lot of what people expected me to do. And I felt like, I was doing something for other people, but not in that way where you do it because you want to be a nice person. But I did it because I felt like it was expected of me. And I don't honestly feel, well, my personal feelings about this is you cannot succeed in that. Because if you don't do something that you are somehow committed to or something that you feel will drive you forward, something that can give you, bring some good energy that you can then project out and share with others, then there's no drive. And I didn't have a drive back then. So I felt like I need to push myself forward and into some kind of scenario where I can feel like I'm blossoming somehow. So going from having a daily job that was a job I didn't want to go to, trying to hunt a dream, starting to see that dream and, well, maybe idea, let's call it an idea instead of a dream to begin with, seeing that idea and seeing it grow somehow, materializing in front of my eyes with hard labor, and then starting to somehow harvest from it, but in a different world back then. So maybe that was the first tipping point, like me actually saying, okay, I make a deliberate active choice to start doing something that feels like it's something I actually want to do. First tipping point. And then let's move a bit forward because we can say it like it is. I've been a tattooer almost 3 decades now. And that's been a hell of a ride. And we could go into that later because I started in what I call the dark ages. And now we are in a technological high beacon time. Anyways, back to the storytelling. Second tipping point is maybe when I've been tattooing for a vast amount of years already, that I felt somehow that I was not being myself in it. I was trying to be a tattooer. I was trying to be that person I thought I was supposed to be within that setting. And it didn't make me that happy. At some point, I felt like I was actually going back to classical, going to job without having any joy in it. And I was like, how can that happen? Because all of this started out with me having a kind of a dream or an idea about actually working with something that gave me the most joy in my childhood, painting and drawing. And I succeeded in that, but I ended up feeling like, why is this not, as I thought it would be, or why is this not better than I thought it could be? And I realized that I was again trying somehow to live up to other people's expectation on what I should do instead of following my own kind of like inner compass or, like having that debate with oneself, taking those 5 minutes.
How did that kind of crystallize, like the whole, let's say, external pressure? Like what's the more, let's say, concrete idea? Like did you do, let's say, tattoo work you didn't want to do, or did you do it in a setting you don't want to do it? Or like what was the main things that you were not kind of happy with in that situation?
Well, you could say those things you just said there all kind of nailed it. It was a different time. It was, people didn't have all those digital platforms like they have today to get inspired from. So it was, let's say there was a monthly magazine coming out with tattoos. Then people kind of wanted that cool looking tattoo from that magazine, all of them. So it was a very narrow corridor of types of humans. You can also say that in all fairness. I'm not going to go into describing them in persons right now. We could do that, but that will come out maybe a little weird. But so the window of opportunity for, feeling creative and feeling inspired and getting new ideas was fairly small. And trying to convince people to go down a different path was close to impossible, because people were inspired by what they saw and I didn't see that much. And again, back to the part about, people felt like back then that when they should have tattoos, they should have tattoos that looked like tattoos. Tattoos was a very narrative it was a little closed world. You would probably project yourself a bit like a kind of a person that wore these tattoos. Like, I'm now a person with tattoos, where the storytelling is completely different today. Now it's like self-development. It's your own story you tell or your own thing you project or whatnot. It's all free and fantastic. But back then it was this weird thing that it seemed like I was helping people building a uniform often. And of course, I cherish the good moments with my old teacher, and I learned a lot. And I'm very glad about actually have gone this journey, because I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't experience all of this. So this old world, when I look back at it today, was really good for my learning, but it was a tough process because I felt like I was doing something that I loved, but I couldn't understand back then that I wasn't doing it in a way where I allowed myself to be me. I tried to be a certain type that should do this job. So it became a job. And then you can say the third and the last tipping point came when I moved here to Copenhagen. I met a very sweet lady. I'm not going to mention her name, but I met her. She was a very great inspiration for me. She was my boss. She became my boss. I started working in her shop. Met her at a tattoo convention in Hamburg back in the early zero something crazy world back then. And she basically helped me build those wings where I could fly free, because she was like, "Hey man, you're like a crazy nice person. Just do what you do." And then I start doing what I'm developed into doing today. I think I became me. I allowed myself to be me within what I loved doing. And if we just move forward up to like present time here, I honestly feel some of the best things I can bring to the table, if you look at what I'm doing and what I can, is the matter of being present with the person I am developing something with. Let's say it's a tattoo, and giving that person a feeling that we are doing this together. And this is just not like sitting and waiting for your laundry to be done, getting your tattoo, or this is not just like a little moment you're supposed to like get over. I'm trying to make that, let's just say it, fairly uncomfortable moment, because it is an interaction with the needle and the skin. I'm trying to make that into more. I'm trying to make that thing being two people maybe constructing some kind of communication that's beyond like, what's the weather today? And, these kind of like non-curious questions, these like keeping a distance, or I'm not supposed to come too close. All that, for me, we can go into that maybe later or maybe not, but all that thing about being afraid of talking about stuff that actually matters with people you don't know or maybe just met. Not that many years ago, I completely skipped that. I completely dropped that thing. I believe that as long as I stay like polite and somehow honest with people, we can basically talk about everything. And that made things a hell of a lot more interesting.
I can see that. And there's been a difference. I mean, so which you guys maybe have figured out at this point now, but you've done a fair amount of tattooing on me, right? Which is also why we're sitting here in the first place. And I think there's been a clear shift between, let's say, the first time I was with you and I mean the last week, when we did the last piece. So I think that's been really interesting. I want to touch on something you said because it resonates a lot with me, and it's this idea of finding yourself, or find the version of the craft you're doing that represents yourself, and the kind of timeline that it takes. Because for me, when I started in coffee, I've been quite vocal about this as well, where I think I spent the first 6-7 years of my coffee journey literally copying my heroes, right? Like, we had a few people in the coffee industry that I was like, if I could be like that, if I can make my coffee taste like that, if I can do the things I do look like that, then that's what I'm striving for, right? And then I think I also got to that point, it was right before I started my own business, where you go, no, but it's something missing here, right? Like, you get to that point where you do what these other people do, but you go, it's not not so much that it's not enough, but it doesn't feel like you have centered yourself in that, right? So I'm a little bit curious, or very curious, also in general, because when I look at tattooing, I'm seeing it as one of these. I don't want to say last remaining crafts, but for me, it's a very traditional craft. There's so much history going into it. It's at least as far as my knowledge, is still this apprenticeship relationship. Obviously, that probably changed today. Like today, I lived in Berlin for a few years, and everyone is a tattoo artist in Berlin, right? Even if you never tattooed before. But I'm curious, one, a little bit about that timeline of like how many years did you actually spend, let's say, not finding yourself in the craft? Like how long time did that actually take you? And then how does one actually go from this, let's say, drawing pen to paper to needle on a skin? Because in my head, that's a big difference, which maybe it isn't. But I'm curious.
That last part about the, let's say, the more technical aspect is something that when I look back at how my old teacher put me into it, I'm very, very happy about the way he did it when I look at it now. But if I can be allowed to use an old movie reference, Karate Kid didn't understand why he was supposed to polish the cars. He didn't understand why he was supposed to do all that stuff that had nothing to do with karate. But then at some point, it unveiled itself that all that was him learning to do the tricks by doing other stuff. And somehow that is a really good metaphor for my teaching, because I entered the shop, and it was a shop back in the day, and if I should describe it a bit, it was a harsh environment. There were some big, not always that friendly looking types of people in there, and people were talking in like a hard voice, and they told about all their testosterone, things they were doing, and things were kind of heavy, and that was somehow how that world was supposed to be. Of course, there was fun and laughter and all, but this environment of big ashtrays full of cigarettes, smoke, and heavy metal and hard tattooing and classical tattoo machines that made a lot of noise made it into kind of an intense room to enter. Back then, I didn't even know that I am a guy that's a little bit sound sensitive. So it must, if I'm trying to think about how it actually was, it must have been kind of crazy when I entered the shop just the first time. But the thing about learning, my old boss did that one thing right about, he said, hey man, here's a drawing room, start doing some drawings. And I came in with these super highly detailed 5 by 5 centimeter small warriors and stuff. And he's like, wow, that's a hell of a detailed drawing. Just make it 200 times bigger. And my brain kind of melted and fell down my ear, because I was like, but I've always been so focused on those details. I was always like, there was my pride and joy that I could take that 1.1 pin and do amazing tiny drawings. But I didn't for 1 second think that, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that in skin. There's a minimum of how close the lines can be, because it's going to blur out a bit over years. So there's some technical aspects that does not allow something to be that tiny. And even though we have this fine line world today, it's simply not doable if you want something that actually works over time and not just right now. But what he said to me is, okay, man, here is a classical tattoo machine. And I'm not going to make that sound in this thing here now, because that's going to be awful for people to hear. But it makes, if anyone was in a tattoo shop 15 years ago, 10 years ago or something, you would hear that classical coil machine running hard, especially because a lot of people worked with them, didn't really know how to work them right. So they were noisy as hell. I got one of those, electricity on it, so I had that noise in my ear, and it makes like a piece of power tool. It gives you those vibrations. It's not exactly ideal for making small, fine line, nice stuff. And then we put a pencil through that holder where you put the tube that you would put the needle through. That fit nicely. You tighten it up. So now you have a pencil in your hand with a big ass fat engine in a massive kind of iron frame. They were quite heavy, the tattoo machines back then, with coils and all. So you had that shaking, noisy machinery on your little fine pencil, and then you sat there and drawed. And it looked like, well, it didn't look that good in the beginning or for a long time, because how would you do that with something shaking? But then again, that was tattooing. You had to actually do something fairly nice with a tool that didn't seem well with my eyes today looking back at it. No, it didn't seem like an optimal tool to do maybe some of the stuff you would do with it, because it was so heavy and bulky and clunky and noisy and but that was like a way into just starting doing that. And I did that for more than a year before I put a needle in a person. More than a year I did these drawings. More than a year I sat for countless hundreds of hours just watching my boss work, watching him, how he moved the hand, how long, because describing for a person how to learn how to tattoo is, well, it's not rocket science, but then at the same time, it's not like when you pull an engine apart and construct something where you say, oh, this gear is supposed to come after this bushing, because otherwise it don't work. There's like a physiological understanding that there's an order to how things are. You can also say, fair enough, a needle hits a cup and then it goes to the skin. How long does it go in the cup for sucking up the ink? Well, that depends a bit on how your machinery runs. How long can you have the needle in the skin? Well, that depends a bit on the skin type. How long should the needle be out? Well, that depends again on how you run your stuff. Everything is up to a debate. Everything is questionable somehow. So it was elastic in a way that was kind of tough to, get into, because there wasn't these like fixed answers for stuff. Everything has to kind of be learned by eye. I had to watch. I couldn't, study a book or listen to, well, podcast wasn't a thing back then. You couldn't go to YouTube because that didn't exist. So everything was classical, hands-on, watching, learning by simply seeing a craftsman doing it, and countless of hours of hand cleaning, all the material, all the stuff we used for that, cleaning the shop, I had to be that desk boy as well. I did all the stupid stuff, all the non-fun stuff, but all the stuff that also learned you. Solding needles. Constructing needles back then is you bought boxes of small, fine, razor-sharp needles, and you had like a thin thread from when you sew. You tied them together. And to make, let's say, a pointy 3 needle, that's the one you make small lines with, you pulled that thread out so it was where the needles was just ending in the tip where they were sharpest. And then you could tie them up so they kind of were standing in a bow, because you also tied them in the other end. And that made the needles kind of go together like this so you could make the point. To make a perfect 3-liner needle, I think when I could make that needle, pre-made needles came to the market. It took me 6 or 7 years to learn to do that from I started. And trust me, I solded needles every day. And it took so long to learn that, even though it was fairly simple, but it was just a matter of those calm hands and, the warm solding iron and that disgusting, you had to use this kind of thing to tie from metal to the solding part, to combine those different types of material. You used this liquid that was like an acid. It was horrible. I once peeled my nose sitting and doing this, and I got acid up in a small wound, and I started screaming like, I don't know. But it was not fun. But today I completely understand why he put me through all this, because it made me, appreciate even more the fun part of the job. But it also makes you understand that back then, at least, all that stuff was necessary to do what I did. Because if you want that good needle, you have to learn how to do it. If you want that nice color, you'll have to learn how to actually mix the pigments. Well, if you want a good machine, it's not going to be out there on the shelves to buy. So you better learn to pull that machine apart and rebuild it with scratch and stuff that didn't come from a tattoo supply shop. It came from various companies where you bought stuff. I went to the pharmacy. I bought like a 5-liter bucket of Vaseline or 10 liter and 200, let's say, black rubber gloves. I tell you, people in the queue moved away. They thought I was going to some crazy party back then, because you don't do that today. You just go to some whatever online supply shop and buy it. But back then, everything had to be built by hand. Or you had to find, let's say I used a power supply to run my machine. That power supply probably came from a place where you could use it for running your like a hobby train at home, or whatever you could use one of those for. So it was about being creative because there was not an industry around my industry. So yeah.
Would you say today, because this is in so many ways is actually again resonating with, let's say, coffee, because when the coffee industry really started to roast coffee, if you look at the machines or brew coffee, if you look at the machines they used versus what they use today, like a new person starting in the industry today would not last 1 second on any of the old machines, not for even a moment, because the amount of, let's say, labor intense, the work was just so different. What you could do, what you understood, how you understand the impact or the result of something was just, let's say, nights apart from what we see here today, right? And it sounds like it's very similar to the tattooing world also, right? Which I think is it's really interesting. And I think I want to ask, is it the same? Because I'm convinced that, not giving any shade to people that just started in the coffee industry, but I think the people that are, let's say, a generation where they got a little bit of input from all different historical aspects of it are much better than the people that are starting today. Because today there's, let's say, they're only scratching the surface, and you get very good very fast because your machinery is better than what it used to be, right? But you actually don't really understand how to use it. Is it a similar thing? Like, bottom line is, obviously tattoos today look different from what they did in the past, I would say, in general, right? But would you say that tattoos are better? It's a bit of a difficult question potentially, but is it the machines that are getting better? Is it like what has changed?
Well, everything has changed because from when I started, the internet was, developed, but it was barely like 5 poor Wikipedia pages. So there was no help there. And the major change and the best change is that back then when I started, knowledge was power and you kept it to yourself. There was no sharing is caring. And that was kind of crazy thinking back that I got somehow brought up that we know this now and we don't tell anyone. And the only one we tell is our very close friends, and they won't tell it to anyone. And at some point that tipped over, until, people came in and asked how to become a tattooer. And well, they got told that you can just get out of here. It's not for you. And then at some point, why is it not for them? Why is it only for someone who maybe know you or know you? And what is this? What is that insecurity built up around? Is it because we are not good enough ourselves that we have to hold it back because potentially there's somebody better than us out there? Well, you know what? If there is, then that's okay, because then they are better. And we cannot stop them because they will find their way anyways. And I'm like today, hey, let's share. So you can say that's maybe one of the biggest differences. Today I share humbly and I do it glad. There's no secrets. There's no nothing, and you can always find it on a YouTube tutorial or whatnot, what you need anyways. But I will gladly help anyone out there because that makes me feel better. And if I can help them, that probably makes them feel better. And that's about the big cake we can all share from. But technical changes, of course, the coil machine I talked about before that ran if you could make them run nice, if you knew how to do that, they were like British sports cars on a sunny day. Good temperature, not too moist, they ran perfectly. But then 10 minutes later, they got warm and then they start running not that perfectly. And then 1.5 hours in your tattoo, or maybe potentially half an hour before you were done with a big tattoo, of course they broke down. Then you have to shift some kind of broken spring, or you put new elastic bands that broke 5 times. So I got blisters because some of those machines, the metal ran that warm and I run them that hard because I was brought up by a tattooer that ran the machinery super hard. And also the type of technical tattoos we did back then, they were heavy and bulky, and there was a lot of black in it, and it's just that style of tattooing. It was so massive, and people needed it to look in a certain way that demanded us to run the machines in a heavy way. And I guess it also the way I was brought up. Today the machines are so much more fine-tuned. There's this steady output of energy that makes you, when you start, exactly what you get and how it runs. So it's a lot easier to predict how things are going to run. You can better predict the times. There's this whole thing about the skin. People today now, they can use these tranquilizer creams and stuff So it's not like back in the day when it was a puzzle, like, can I finish this tattoo? Can I not finish it? How long am I going to get? There was a stress factor. All that stress factor is not there today. Today, with my knowledge being brought up, 99.9% of all tattoos I do, I can completely lean back in it, both with the knowledge, because I have that, but I can also think a little bit about back in the day and sound like somebody's grandpa saying, yeah, Christmas was all white in the 50s. But I don't know if it makes me a better tattooer, but for my sake and my only personal sake here is that I think it makes me a bit more humble because I was brought up in something that was seen with the eyes today a lot more frustrating and a lot harder in many ways, a lot more, you could say, unsafe and unbalanced in many ways, but also a fun time. It was adventure time back then. It was really fun because you felt like a conquistador discovering new lands, and there was a lot of fun to that way. So you could say today the business has somehow developed more into one kind of, there's this, like, you have this social media built up on things. You have these, like, things have a structure now that somehow people start following, and maybe I do unconsciously myself a bit as well. Not trying to though, but maybe it happens. But technically, yes, it changed a lot because the machinery now is a lot more fine-tuned. You can buy everything online. There's no knowledge out there that you can't access fairly easy. There's a lot of, like, safety and regulations, and all that dark Middle Ages stuff is kind of gone because there's full awareness of everything. If we take the clientele, that development too is super positive because back in the day, it seemed a little like it was a certain type, where now I tattoo every type of person from every social layer, and that makes it really, really fun and interesting. And I don't feel like there's anybody basically holding back. I see a lot of, like, 50 or 60-year-old first-timers now, like, going into it where that was non-existent 20 years ago, 30 years ago for that sake. And all that combined machinery, the you can say the way we worked around the environment and the type of clients and all this awareness today, basically everything is better now than what it was. But what it was somehow also important for my learning and my way of being brought up, because I think that gave me at least it gave me somehow a full picture by knowing some of what was back then and understanding what is now. And maybe it made me more appreciative. I'm not sure, but I think that sums it up to some degree.
So you've been tattooing for, a pretty long time, right? Like, you had a very long career doing this one thing, right? Was there ever a time where you were like, nah, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm out. I'm done. Was there ever, like, a second guess? Was it like it wasn't enough? Was it I don't know, a midlife crisis where you went, I need to change something? Or did you always just feel, no, this is what I'm supposed to do? And
I can say yes fairly easy to that, because of course, I was brought up a young man going into it, a very, very young man, 18 barely, getting into it. All interesting, all exciting. Then working hard for many years in this fun, crazy environment. And then seeing, basically kind of living a bit of a rock star life, I guess. It opened a couple of fun doors for just the fact of being a tattooer back then. It made me go to a certain amount of funny parties and meeting some really, really interesting people and having some fun with that. And then somehow starting believing that I was more than I was somehow by just the sheer fact of being in that group of people. A little bit of self something, yeah. The thing about I think that the thing about moving forward, and no, let's start this. Let's start this over again. We have to start this over again. Can we? This is going to be one of those where I say avocado, because I was like, what the hell am I talking about? So help me here. help me on getting back on track.
Really the question here and what is interesting is, I think in general, always when people have done what they are doing for a very long time, that I'm very curious in what kind of what keeps the drive, right? And is there times where you also feel like, fuck, I don't want to, like I'm out, I don't want to do this. And how have you then dealt with these times?
Now remember, yes, the thing about me seeing some of my, let's say, close friends getting educations and then starting doing courses and building upon that. And then me at some point feeling like, but I am here now in this. And it doesn't feel like there's any stepping stones career-wise, if you look at it like that. And then I felt like I'm not somehow going anywhere. I'm having a ton of fun with this and it's all nice and dandy, but it looks like people around me is constructing these scenarios in society that somehow makes them step upwards. And I think I was in a point of my life there in my maybe late 20s or something, that I also felt like I was supposed to exceed and move forward, and all these so-called goals I was supposed to have because I, got influenced by all this surrounding things. But then again, a bit forward from that, and also I tried a various amount of things, and I've always been, of course, working in I've been doing a broad amount of advertisement, helping companies with all kinds of creative, presentations for all kinds of things. I have a broad portfolio of all the kind of stuff I've been doing, but it was never something that was like, wow, I'm just going to jump into that and only do that, because tattooing is my one love. But actually back then I didn't even know why it was my one love. And that comes kind of in this chapter, because at some point after this, wanting to exceed and get to all these points, I think I start realizing one of these revelations about becoming myself in the thing I'm doing, that I am actually so happy about being able to be myself to the fullest, that I don't have to follow some kind of guideline. Let's say if I work in some kind of company that, to be that person, you're supposed to do these certain things and be in this box to go over here. And success means that you get a bigger car and you get more mortgage loans. And, these natural steps, I actually, in my work life, at least, if we isolate that, I didn't have to do that, because my work life was my hobby, meaning that I could actually just develop as a person by being around other people and do what I love every day, and just refine that. Just keep on, believing that I can add more. The lines can become even more sharp. The colors can be more, nicely put in there. The black can be more solid, like that old sushi chef. He can use a whole life on learning to boil the rice and do that stuff. And I can do that too. And I can still feel I develop within that. And some people can say, yeah, that's a very narrow frame. I don't care, because I feel really, really happy about my little world. I love my world, and I can still be curious on the world outside, because I am so happy and fortunate that on a daily basis I meet people like you and a lot of other interesting people that do so much different stuff. So I can inspire on a daily basis by doing what I love doing on people that I can have super interesting conversations with. For me, what's not to love about that? So the part about going from being a little, why am I not doing like the other people do, to realize I don't need to do that. I need to be me, and I need to do what feels right for me. And what feels right for me feels like what I'm doing right now. Doing what I love. What I've always been loving, but at some point maybe not always been appreciative towards, because maybe I didn't have the right set of glasses on. Maybe I do not now, maybe I don't, but it feels right, and it feels like I am in the right place, and I'm not looking for a different career setting anymore, and haven't been doing that for many, many years, because I feel like I am grounded and I'm landed in something that feels like it's me. And I feel like I can develop within that.
Which I think is so, it's such an important place to kind of get to or be in, because I think a lot of people have this thing where they're always searching for the solution somewhere else, right? Always. And that can be, I need to change my job situation. I need to change my career. One of the drivers, absolutely, as you said before, is just kind of, but my world or the world around me is expecting me to do certain things. We're at a certain age, so on and so on, right? Like you can't be a barista for the rest of your life, for example, right? Um, but I think so often the answer to that is just look at, okay, but is it the situation the issue, or is it the way that I'm looking at the situation? Or am I putting myself in a situation in here that actually allows me to fulfill what I need to fulfill, right? But I must ask, because like tattoo artists or anything, like you're a very creative person and you have a lot of hobbies around the tattooing as well, right? But you never, and this is a little bit back to your answer about what coffee means to you. You talk about these kind of micro breaks. Have you ever taken a break, like a larger break throughout the career to like reset, do something different? Or have you always just have this like constant flow of, because you're literally creating art pieces all the time. Like you're continuously every day almost. Just I mean, it's the same when I come to you with like, okay, we're gonna do a new tattoo here. What are we gonna do, right? That's like it's a new creative process. Have you ever got to a point where it's like, fuck, I can't do this. Like I'm not getting what's coming out. It's not what I want to do. Or
Yeah, but that's very interesting because I think it's partially the way I was brought up in what I'm doing that part of me doesn't necessarily only see myself as this kind of artist. I see myself as this kind of like a craftsman because I was brought up in a craft, learning to do a lot of stuff to make sure that I can actually do what I loved. So this thing about learning to build machines, learning to fix machines, learning to salt needles, learning to, just basically clean the shop and just do all that practical stuff around made me see myself as a craftsman as much as an artist. And a craftsman, when he goes out to people to help them build something, he doesn't come to the client and say, you know what, today I don't feel like putting your floor in because your floor is not, today I can't go with oak today because I feel like I'm more like a cedar man today. That's not going to happen because in that world, that's not allowed. So somehow, why should I bring that, whatever it seems like in that creative world where I don't feel inspired, I don't feel like I can do anything today. Why am I bringing that into my world? My world is a world where people come into me and expect something from me. And what I'm going to do my very best with what I have. And for some reason, I always have something. And if it's because I somehow feel, I feel committed to some degree to deliver something, then I think I can always deliver to a degree where people feel really glad about it and where I can feel relieved and feel that this is something I am happy about. This is something that I can work with. This is something that can function. Also because what I do is I tattoo a broad variety of styles because that's how I brought up. Back then there wasn't that luxury of having this one line of work you did in this very kind of insignia, style. I was brought up various styles because that was how the world was, and I kind of kept that in my life. So when people come in with something that's maybe a bit out of my comfort zone, I always ask myself this question: can I do this technically good? And if I can answer yes to that, and I say, can I do this without rolling my eyes in a mental way, like, oh my God, this is terrible? Can I do this where I can feel like I'm committed to it? If I can say yes to those two things, I can basically do most. But if you come with something that's where I have to say no to some of that stuff within, then I'm going to be humble about it and ship it off to one of my colleagues and say, hey, you should go there with it. So it's not a no, because we can't have no. It's always like, let me show you the door, the right door, not just the door. So I will always navigate into I think, a path where it's possible. I just, maybe it's me. Maybe there's some physiological thing wrong with my frontal lobes or whatnot. But the thing is, I just never felt like I couldn't do something. I always felt like I could find some way to do it. And of course, I can say that it's not always succeeded because I had drawings and ideas and development with clients that just didn't work out. We couldn't find each other. Maybe we were as humans not connectable, or I didn't understand the idea fully, or the person's description of what they want was actually not what they really wanted. So, of course, I haven't always succeeded, but I think I have a pretty good track record on succeeding. But of course, I'm just a human like everyone else. But I just never really felt that I was allowed to be like that. Did it come out of insecurity as a younger man that I'm not cool enough to see myself as a full-on artist? I don't think so. And today, when I think about it, I think it's my kind of practical upgrowing in the business I do. And maybe also my background also as a construction worker. And, you just have to get up and do it kind of thing, up and go. Maybe some of that accumulated together with this kind of thing that, I'm a show dancer, I get on stage each day, I'm dancing my very best, and I'm never going to allow people to see if I have a broken ankle or I have the fever. I'm going to do my very best with what I have because that's expected of me. But I also like that because that's also something that gives me that motivation each day to get the feet out of the bed and like, okay, today I'm going to give it what I have. I'm going to give it my very effing best because that's what I have. And that's what I'm going to bring to the table. So.
But it's actually such an interesting work environment, right? Because you're literally on display always, right? There's no point. Sure, you have, obviously one part of it is the art that you create on someone, right? Or the visual reference, right? But at the same time, it's like, if you have a bad day, you kind of stuck there, right? You can't hide behind a computer in a way that a lot of other people can do, right? I'm curious about one thing, and it's something I reflect on quite a lot myself in my own journey here. Because let's say, as a business owner or someone that is building something, plus working with a craft, then I'm always very curious of the balance of how much time do you spend, let's say, trying to become a better tattoo artist, and how does that look? And is that something that you can kind of easily fit into your everyday life, or is that something you have to kind of fight for to fit in? Because I've seen on my own journey where part of why I've been very active in competitions and so on is that that's where I force myself to push my craft forward, because I have a lot of other stuff to deal with, so to speak, right? But how does it look in your world in terms of like trying to improve your craft?
I think, well, early, it was basically about surviving. So that was not even like a thing. And then at some point, like mid-range, like tattooing plus 10 years, something, I was at that time in my life where we were also looking at these like goals. So there was also all these like tattoo-wise goals. Like, I'm supposed to be better at this kind of line type. I'm supposed to be better at this. I want to win, that convention prize there. And I want to do that. And I want to do that. So there was a lot of like hunting goals, like technically, and see if I could achieve all that. In my present life now, I feel, I guess, a little like an old kung fu fighter. Like, this guy's just dancing around, tipping toes, and there's butterflies over his head. I'm not saying I'm that much in balance, but more the matter of the way now I become better is actually when I take my 5 minutes. Not when I'm tattooing. It's when I do that thing where I, mentally just go a little back and realize what situation I'm in. I'm sitting here right now with a sweet client. This client is interesting. This tattoo is super cool to do. It's a fun project to paint. And this is my life. And these kind of moments where I kind of wake up in the moment and I allow myself to do that, to find that time, that puts the hyperfocus like up to warp speed. And then, the appreciation of just being is like, okay, I'm going to see if I can make it even sharper. I'm going to see if I can add even more to this. So it's not so much anymore like it was in the earlier days where I kind of forced myself to do the drawing training and tattoo training and doing these things like alongside actually tattooing. Now it's within, it's a flow. It's me sitting on a daily basis feeling like, you know what? You could in the old days say that a back piece is more important than that tiny tattoo on the wrist. Not today. I'm going to give that little tiny tattoo right there as much focus as I did with that big tattoo there, because everything matters. The detail matters. That little thing there. I'm going to give that client just as cool an experience as I'm going to do with that guy there, or girl, or whatever not. And if you don't drop any of those stones on the floor just because that stone doesn't seem like as an important stone as the other stone, if you kind of keep them all in your pocket and you can move forward and you can do it sort of elegantly and easy, make it look easy. That's also kind of a fun project of mine, is to make it in other people's eyes appear easy. That's a fun way of also developing, like, how can you be in the shop in a way where everything is flowing and sort of having fun with it. So now my way of developing is basically having fun with what I'm doing at the moment. So,
and that's been something I've been taking away when we had our, because over the years of tattooing, we had long conversations about things. Right? There's been a few tattoos, and I think also in this conversation now, right, you do make this sound very easy, right? And I think there's a flow there that is really interesting, right? But I think if you scale it up more on, okay, I want to start a new career in something and I want to be really good at what I do and I want to be kind of recognized within the context of what I do, right? That's not so easy, I would say, in general, right? And it feels like you've somehow gotten to that point, because I know people that done what they do in pretty high level in various different industries. But if they're done it for, let's say, the amount of time that you have done it, they're bound to have some really, let's say, shit years or shit times where like that part of their life just didn't work. They couldn't get out what they wanted. That's why I'm so interested in this kind of, let's say, 5-minute micro breaks, and how that can be, let's say, adopted on a larger scale, because there's, no one that performs 100% throughout the year, right? And we know, like, we share a common interest in gym and training and lifting things, right? And it's such a good analogy, because the people that just try to do the same thing throughout the whole year, they're bound to maybe not fail, but they're for sure not going to progress the way that they could, right? Because you can't maximize your output if you keep the input the same, right? There has to be a change, right? So I'm a bit curious, just in general, maybe like world of tattooing, but also just personally. I know, again, you have a few other things you're doing. What's the kind of the future? What's the next step? Like, what's coming up?
What's coming up? Well, maybe I have an answer for that. Maybe I don't. But what I do know is what I'm doing now with trying to put that, focus into every detail of the aspect of what I'm doing that I love. If that somehow also can actually go into the rest of what I'm doing in my life savings, because I feel a little like I'm a ballet ninja in my job, because I can navigate, I can talk to everyone. I feel like I'm so happy and I'm so calm when I'm in my setting there, when I'm in my safe zone. So I feel like maybe my greatest task now for me is to take some of that outside of what I love and see if I can implement that in other aspects of my life. Not saying that a lot of that stuff is not already somehow functional in kind of a manner like what I'm doing when I'm tattooing, but I feel somehow I can inspire myself in other aspects by seeing, okay, if you can run it like this here, that thing can actually be implemented over here and in that aspect. So I think there's a lot of positive dripping from this thing about being aware and listening and trying to make sure you don't lose those small stones on the floor and have an eye for the detail that I would love to be able to take outside my so-called work life. Because again, my life, things blur together. I don't have that, go up and then I'm at job at that time. And when I'm off job, I'm not at job anymore. And now I'm doing private stuff. My life is basically one potpourri of stuff that's kind of boiling together. Friends is also my clients, and my outside life of my tattooing is also, well, it can maybe interact with that in many aspects. So, but I see that I'm at my very best when I'm in my tattoo scenario. So I'm actually trying to take that out and maybe use that even more in my private life. I see this thing about talking with people as becoming a bigger and a bigger thing. Maybe that's going to be even, a bigger thing in my future. Maybe there's going to be more of this somehow. I don't know what it's going to lead to, but this communication thing here where we're talking about something, we're talking about everything and nothing. I don't know where it can lead, but as long as it feels right, maybe it's going to lead me somewhere good. And I don't need to set any goals like I did when I was a younger man. I don't have any like great future goals besides, happy life, healthy kids and wife, and not tipping over on my motorcycle or drowning on some like diving trip or anything like that. But just basically don't lose those small stones on the floor. Keep an eye for the detail. Communication is super important in every aspect. And then maybe the most important part for me is the matter of being able to step back like those 5 minutes and being appreciative of every aspect. Because again, what is your motivation? How can you not have like super bad days, or at least pretend like, or something like that? I think it's the matter of every time you feel a little let down, at least for me, for my sake, at least you feel a little like, I couldn't do this, or this is not fun at my job, or why am I doing this? Or, the other ones are having more fun than me. It looks like they're exceeding more their careers. For me, it's about keeping it a little on your own turf. So I'm looking at myself and say, hey man, you were brought up. It didn't seem like you had those cards to play at where you are today. You are where you are today. It's something you did entirely yourself, of course, with the help of friends and whatnot, but primarily your own goals you achieved. I can honestly say that I'm spending almost all my time during the day doing stuff that I actually like doing and I'm appreciative about. And I'm living my life in a way that I set it up. Nobody else is kind of controlling how I'm living my life. Of course, I'm trying to navigate with wife and whatnot and all that to make sure that things work. But I have a really good setting overall for what I'm doing on a daily setup. And that's something I cherish a lot. And every time I feel a little like something is teasing me, this is not right, step back 5 minutes, look at your overall setup. I'm grateful. I have a really good time. And if this is not the best day of my life, so what? I had a ton of good days behind that one, and there's going to come a bad day tomorrow maybe. We're going to take it there. When it's there, we're going to try to fix it, or we're going to try to do our very best at that time also, And what if it's not my overall best, the best day I ever did? So what? As long as I can look at the mirror and see a reflection and say, okay, you did what you could, man. And stay honest about it. Well, so maybe this blurred a little bit together, but I think my overall life goal right now is basically to do what I'm doing and just enhancing on the things that feels right. And remember to be, honest with myself and remember those small breaks because they're super important for me because I have a tendency again to the fast decision making and just run towards, I don't know what, but so try to stay present, try to, communicate like we're doing now.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where you make that sound so easy, but and I get this a lot in this podcast actually, because I think like you guys, regardless of let's say the industry you all have been in, the spin here and kind of joined this conversation, I think because you guys are actually so good at what you do, you all kind of come to the same conclusion in a way, living it out differently, right? But you get to a point where staying in the present and giving yourself time, staying true to yourself. I think all of those things it's amazing how, let's say, comfortable you are when you say that, because I think that's something that most people on this planet are, let's say, fighting for or trying to figure out how to reach, right? And I think very much the key is when you get to a point where, as you said, like you recognize that, okay, but when I'm in my tattoo bubble, there's something here that has a lot of value. And I can most likely move that value over in other aspects of my life, right? I think that's a really interesting place to be, and I think that's when you start realizing, because everyone in life has something they're really good at. I believe that they may not necessarily work with it, They may not tap into it, but they have this like flow state where when I'm doing this thing, I'm really happy. Everything seems to work, right? But then they often go outside of that and things burn and crashes and it just doesn't work, right? Because they haven't realized that you can take that same tiny little thing and just move it over because everything in a way is the same, right? You just have to kind of sync with that. And I think that's really interesting. Um, maybe random question and maybe a bit difficult, but I think because you make all of this sound so easy. And I know a lot of people listening here are people that maybe, they have something they really want to do in life. They're probably not tapping into it the way that they want to. They feel that they can't necessarily move from the structure that they have built up in life. And to be fair, maybe that's an easier decision to make when you are younger rather than, let's say, in our age now. But do you have any, let's say, more concrete tips outside of this, let's say, break, pause, give yourself time? But is there anything more like specific that you feel that have helped you on your journey?
Well, I think, again, now it's easier to reflect a bit back when you've been doing it for a long time. But when I look at myself, also the matter of being, and now I'm going to use a little bit of a boring word, being a bit realistic. What are you? What are your abilities, man? You cannot be what's a firefighter if you're afraid of warmth. You cannot be a diver if you hate water. Let's look a bit at what we have and what is our skill set. What are we good at? So if you're trying to exceed in something that maybe in every aspect looks like it's just not you, man. If you want to be a singer but everybody hates your voice, well, then probably it's not going to happen. But if you have an honest belief, if you again, the mirror is a good thing. If you can look at that mirror and say you have an honest belief and you have something to bring to the table. And again, for my sake, it's been really valuable not to measure myself too much up against others. If you believe you have something very valuable to bring to whatever table you want to sit at, and you think you can bring that, don't try to look at how other people did that. Bring what you have in that aspect, and believe in what you have and then go for it. I know it can sound fluffy, but for me, somehow, if I look at my storytelling, it kind of worked. When I start being honest with myself, I started being happy in what I already loved. And then I start progressing as a human because it was part of me understanding that you cannot do it with one arm on the back or two eyes on the watch. Either you're there or, well, maybe you're not going to go there because it can be a hard scene you want to get into. So if you're not, just be honest with yourself and also allow yourself to fail. That's also a thing, it seems a little like people is kind of kicking their own ass over not being, again, the best or not getting to a certain point in a certain time. Again, you're measuring yourself up against whatever, not social media, whatever's out there. Stop doom scrolling. Stop looking at what people do. If you have an idea, go for your idea. And then if you at some point discover, because you can kind of like blindfold it, because you kept yourself away from these distractions, that somebody else had that idea already, well, then tough luck. I guess you have to look for something else. But just don't let yourself influence by what you think other people will think on what you're doing. If you have a good idea, trust in your idea and try to go for it with the least amount of distractions in something that you think, oh, I'm supposed to look over here because that's how I'm supposed to do. That's how other people told me to do it. Don't do that. You don't have to look for a new way. Just do it that way that feels like the right way to you, because the more honest you can be with yourself, the closer I think you are to achieve any given goal in life. I think that's so important. And also the matter of, one thing is to be able to kick your own ass. Another thing is, if you do something and it works, fucking tap yourself on the shoulder if somebody else doesn't do it. Don't live under this world that you can only be shouted at, but nobody can say you're fucking good. And if nobody else does it, well, tell yourself, today I was fucking awesome. Today I did something amazing. Today I can give you an example. I had not that long time ago, I tattooed a guy. He came in from the street. He lost his mother and father in some crazy car accident some years before that. And I made not a realistic portrait, but I made this kind of like funky little painting of his father that was an earlier jazz musician with an instrument. And we set it up nicely. I tattooed that thing on his arm. He went to the mirror and he started crying. And it's not so matter much about this emotional roller coaster thing, but it was more when he turned and looked at me and said, I don't know how you did it, but you did it. You did it in a way that this has an impact on me. And this is something that I'm going to hold and cherish. This is something, this has a tremendous meaning to me. And for me, I felt I made a difference. And I felt that day that I was fucking awesome. I was a superhero for a couple of hours because I made something for another person that felt like that was exactly what I was supposed to do right there at that moment. So that day I was awesome. And some days I'm not awesome. And then I can have a talk with myself about that. But also remember to tell yourself when you are. So stay humble. Don't get distracted by somebody who tells you the way to do stuff. If you feel you have a better idea and, well, you're not breaking any laws or doing anything, highly uncritical or unsafe and all that, go with your own idea and let that be your instrument. And remember your 5-minute breaks. And yeah.
That sounds like a plan. I'm 200% agree with this idea or notion of like the biggest advantage you have. And I know for some people it's hard to, let's say, sink into. It's hard for me sometimes as well, but it's really you, right? That's the biggest difference. I talk about that all the time when it comes to, let's say, starting April. You can say whatever you want about April, good or bad. Don't really know, don't really care. But it's the company I know how to build, right? So if there's for good or bad, and whether this, we still exist in 10 years or not, I made it the company I can make, right? And that's the only real advantage I have because there's a million other people doing what I do in the industry, right? But there's only one company that is run by me. So then you have an option, right? Like either you tattoo what everyone else is tattooing, or you're doubling down on, no, this is what I like to do. This is how I like to do something. This is how I know how to do something. And I'm just going to do that 200%. And then obviously you have to be very okay with the outcome because there's still not a guarantee that you're going to make it. But I believe with you in the sense that it's at least for regardless of how long that ride is, it will be the best ride you've ever done. Doesn't matter if that's like a year, a lifetime. If you give yourself the opportunity to run the version that only you can do, you are going to do a very interesting thing. And I think there are so many people that have not tapped into that and they're struggling, right? And I think it's a big part of that is being okay with, again, like the successful part and the also obviously I fucked this up, because the issue with doing that is that if you fail, it's on you, right? But it's become such much more dynamic in the process, and I think you learn so much about it, right? And whatever you choose to do next in life, I think having said that, okay, but I've gone through life trying to do this one thing my way, I think that's a lot of value, because I think there's a lot of people that, let's say, eventually tap out and they go, no, but I never really tried to do my thing, or maybe didn't even discover what that thing was, right? You need to be open to it.
I think this matter of the more you can be yourself within whatever you're doing, the more you can show people that you are there as that person and not just whatever any given salesman or a person that has an agenda behind, then the easier it is to people relax around you and maybe trust in your version and the story of whatever you're selling and displaying or presenting. And for me, somehow, it seems like, yes, the world around me is getting tougher and there's more like, competition and whatnot. But somehow it seems like for me, it's getting easier and easier because, again, it seems like a lot of people is following these guidelines, what they so-called think they should do. And I feel like in my world, this matter of I'm looking at myself as a kind of a me being me in the scenario has a value. That's part of the value. That's part of what you get. You get me. When we're tattooing, I'm giving parts of myself out to that client, and hopefully that builds up that kind of like also relation bound thing, you know. So I'm also building for the future. I'm planting a seed, you know, by just being me. So I'm not even trying consciously to build that seed, but that seed will come because I am who I am, and I trust in what I am and what I can bring. I know that I can make people have a hell of a time, a good time, and we can have good talks. So why not bring that to the table when I know that's my, you know, upper hand? So you can both see it as a kind of a, oh, you're doing that for a like a business kind of like a angle on it. Yeah, maybe so, but it's also me being me. So I'm not trying to shove anything down people or doing anything where like, hey, I'm selling this, but I'm not really selling this. No, I just discovered in a well, you can say in a late part of my work life here, or my adult work life, that the matter of just being honest with yourself and projecting that to the clients for my sake, and just being willing to just also have the not always fun talks, not always keeping things light because it's comfortable, but also being willing to go down some of those, you know, if you talk with people, you could also come into conversations where things is not always fun. But if you're willing to talk with people openly about stuff, openly give your opinion and not being afraid of how that will hit you back, and of course, always be nice, play nice. Then I think, you know, whatever you do, I think you can exceed. But if you have some kind of agenda hidden and you're trying to push something, but you put on this kind of like brave face because that's what you think you should do, it's a facade. I don't believe in it. And what I'm selling is, I'm selling an idea of I can help you with something. And you have to trust in me doing that. And if you look at me and think I'm wearing some kind of mask, and you're an intelligent man, that maybe I can fool someone, but maybe not you. And why would I? And would you trust in that? You know, like, would you trust your product if it didn't somehow seem honest? We can put bubble plast around and we can wrap it and we can give it fancy names and whatnot. But you tell a story, I tell a story. And we have ourselves in it. Hopefully that's what people hear and see. And that's why they listen, I guess. And that's why they want to talk, and that's why they want to communicate. And by just share communication like this talk today, maybe something comes out of that. And again, that's a fruit in the basket. And maybe that's a job opportunity. Maybe that's a life opportunity. So don't just go for what you think is something that can help you. Be curious. If something comes along the way and it doesn't seem like something that can be in something, if it's interesting, be curious, do it. Maybe that's your angle. Maybe that's your opportunity. You know, again, it's fluffy, it's elastic, it's everything and nothing, but it's just been working for me all those years somehow, and it's working even better now when I'm more aware of it. So, yeah.
I think that's, first of all, a great way to wrap this up, but it's also so true, right? I think that, I mean, again, is maybe one of those things where easier said than done, potentially, but then at the same time, no, because it's just you that has to actually tune in with yourself properly and give yourself time to do that, and dare to be the version of you that you want to be, and realize the surroundings. That can be relationships, that can be obviously in business, that becomes a slightly different thing because you use it to pay rent, but it's also trusting enough in your own ability to put things to work that it's gonna work, right? And building that up over time.
And I think one important fact is that if I look at my work life and those transitions where I became more aware and learned more about myself and moved to a more positive direction that I want to be in and what I'm in now, they came out of maybe terrible incidents and tragic moments and things where I felt the most down. So I could say, don't be afraid of the failure, because maybe the failure is exactly where you're going to learn the most. You know, let's say some of the times I've been most honest with myself has been some of the times where I really had to look hard in that mirror. You know, I had a couple of years ago when I had to look at myself and say, there's a lot of things in my life that doesn't work. How can I do something to reset this? And it was a hard conversation with myself about this matter of, hey, you're actually not really good at that. And that thing over there is not working for you, man. Saying it out loud, talking to yourself, and that's not weird at all. Don't think it, talk it. Say it out loud, that it somehow materializes. I really have to move from this because I didn't do well there. I got criticism from people, and it was so hard, and it really hurts when somebody says something about you that it's true. If you're not doing well, if you're not striving in this, but then instead of just turning it into some kind of anger and projecting out and say, oh, it's their fault and that fault and whatnot. Again, the mirror. Maybe I wasn't that good there. Maybe I didn't do good there. But then instead of just collapsing and falling apart, then take that hard look and take that hard talk with yourself. Say, you know what, tomorrow, it's not going to be an ideal day, but I'm going to do better there. And then it's small steps, small baby steps, because we are not in this for the short ride. This is not like a ping pong field where the ball hits there and there, right? This is about a matter of people wanting to go somewhere, right? They want to grow and build businesses and stuff, not. So if you have a hard setback, yeah, it's a hard setback, but look at it on the long term. I can say like it's almost a 30-year in one business. So I can say, even though my hardest setbacks, that if you look at them isolated, it looks like you're falling back like a decade. But if I look at it now on a time frame of 30 years, it's just small bleeps. And the hardest, and I had some hard ones where I was doubting myself down to my core. But those setbacks also helped me move forward. And again, you're in it for the long ride because you're trying to build a foundation for something. So they just, at some point, when you look back, they become small bleeps, but important bleeps. So failure and failing and getting shouted at and getting told you're not good enough, it's not that dangerous. Because it's an opportunity. It's just an opportunity to look at that mirror and talk to yourself and say, hey, man, or girl, or whatever. Now you got this in your face and maybe it's right. Do something about it. Let's go. But you don't change it overnight. You start by, just be a little better. Be a little better to listen more to your colleagues. What did that person say? Okay, I'm going to be more aware now because I know this annoys that person that I did that. What can I do to make that better? Just be a better colleague, be a better boss, be a better whatnot, Don't just have your eyes on the prize. Again, I know I used this metaphor many times this time about the small stones, but that person over there is also important. Maybe it's just like your newest employee or whatnot, but try to have a focus on that too, because maybe that's more important than your major life goal out there, because maybe that thing will accumulate something even better than whatnot over there. So be aware and be honest with yourself and don't be afraid of the setbacks. Because setbacks learns us a lot. At least for me, I learned a lot from getting kicked.
Yeah, and they're gonna come.
Of course,
there's no super successful person that you're looking up to that has not gone through probably a lot more shit than you have, right? There's no one that's won a competition that hasn't lost more competitions than you have lost, and so on and so on, right? There's one thing I want to touch on, and I know I'm running this over time as I always do, but it's an interesting conversation, so I'm justifying it that way. Legacy. You have kids. You have a business. How important is this, like, long term? Is this something you think about? Like tattoos, we touched a little bit on it last time I got a tattoo from you. It's this, you actually create work that will be there for a very long time, right? But at the same time, they also have an expiration date in a way, like you said, right? Where it's like people are going to have them throughout their lifetime and then they're not going to be around anymore, right? And there's something a bit like poetic about that, right? But this is something you think about a lot. Like, do you have a consideration for what's after your time, so to speak?
I think as a younger man, I had a lot of this thinking about how can I make sure that I'm here after, my running out date at some point. And then at some later point, I think I discovered that maybe that's not that important, because I think the way I run my life is that I'm trying to micromanage and focus at the moment and being my best here, because I'm not good at being one of these people up in the air balloon and trying to navigate my whole entire life. For me, it works personally better than I'm right down here, trying to be in this scenario I'm in now. So future-wise, yes, you say it's poetically that somehow it disappears when I disappear. And that's okay with me. As long as the memory that disappears about me is a memory of a person that did the best with what he had and what he could. And again, the construction worker talks now, being a bit humble. It's okay that that wooden floor I put at some point, it rottens away. But at least I hope people until that point can appreciate that floor was damnedly nice put down there. It looks really good until that point. But there is also, of course, a bit of me that wants something to live on forever. But it just seems less and less important. And it seems for me more and more important that what I put out now, no matter how long it lives and whatnot, I wanted to somehow be positive. I wanted to make people happy when they look at it. And I want them to stay happy when they look at it and don't look at it like, oh my God, what did I do? You know, I'm really hoping that I'm putting these rings in the water that just becomes more rings. And, you know, and I see clients come to me because it's tattooed one of their friends or relatives or something. And it's not just because that's convenient, but also because that person said that, hey, it was amazing visiting Martin and having that conversation and feel like he listened to me and he did something that exceeded my idea of what he could do. You know, maybe that's my legacy. Maybe my legacy should just be in whatever history book that my grandkids read, that once there was this guy that got brought up and he had what he had and he did the most of it. And he actually made a tremendous amount of people quite happy with what he could do, with what he had as a skill set. And maybe that's just okay, man. I think that right now, I think that honestly, yeah. I'm so focused on the present and wanting things to work now that legacy, just the same as what I'm doing now, just more. Yeah.
It sounds to me like that you're in a really good spot, right? I think in general, it's super interesting, right? And I'm going to continue to follow your journey. I'm sure we'll talk about more tattoos as well. So I'm sure we're going to get to that point. Thank you so much, Martin, for taking the time. It's been super nice. And thank you guys for listening and watching and everything you do. And make sure to subscribe or whatever. Like it's nice if you do it, but at least tune in and learn something, right? Thank you. That's been super nice.
Thank you, Patrik. It was cool, man.